Okay.
Every country I've ever been to, I'm like, I'll do the tourist spots first, and then I'll go, like, I'll be in the hood. I was in Morocco in the hood, like amongst the people, like I was one of them, because you don't really understand the culture. You got to know the people to understand the culture.
I think New York City is the greatest place in the world.
I don't want to sound cliche, but it is the land of opportunity.
I first moved to New York as a resident in 2013, but my father's from New York, so I used to come up here, every year, at least for one holiday.
I think this is where everybody comes to dream in some way. You have so much opportunity to dream, and
the cost of living is high, but you see people making it, whether it's through help of family members or just people banding together.
This is a city where you grind.
It's definitely somewhere where if you come here, you will definitely be able to make. If you can make it here, you can make it in any other city.
My first thought of New York, being from the South, or the South compared to New York, is that it's a big place, tall buildings.
Everybody's living in huge apartment buildings. You're talking about 6 floors, 8 floors, 8 apartments per floor, and each apartment had like 8 people living in there.
People moving fast.
I've heard that many of my friends who moved down south, when they move down south, they say, man, why is everything so slow?
New York is cool. It's great for what I do as a photographer, but if I had to pick a place that I wanted to live forever, it's probably not New York, just because it's a little too busy.
The traffic is annoying. People cutting you is a little annoying. However, one thing about New Yorkers is, if you don't mind our business, we won't mind yours.
you see how she just walked through the camera. You don't see those things in other places.
And Manhattan is like the central of everything when it comes to the boroughs,
A lot of corporate businesses is up there.
Back in the day, they had pyramids when they walked through the streets. We have skyscrapers.
Manhattan to me is a rectangle, I used to tell people. People used to say, oh, I can't get around. I said, no, Manhattan's a rectangle. The long way is uptown, downtown, and the wide way is east and west.
I don't even have to touch that. You already know what time it is.
Who comes here if you're like, getting the tour?
Right. They want to go to Manhattan, Soho.
Fashion is up there.
You did the Soho thing, Times Square, and yeah, you got to ingratiate yourself in the culture.
Manhattan, we knew it was like for the yuppies, the hipsters, the rich kids.
Elite schools in the city is up there as well. They have a lot of colleges.
Once again, that's a false narrative.
When I was 6, we moved to Washington Heights. Washington Heights was a whole different world for me growing up there. There was a lot of crime. You're talking about the late 80s, early 90s.
It's real strict up in Manhattan.
From there, I moved to the Lower East Side, gave me a whole different perspective of Manhattan.
The police is on every corner. Not saying that they're not on every corner in every other borough, but it's more.
I met some of the best people and some of the worst people I've ever met in my life there.
I used to think Harlem was its own borough.
If you're going to the east side of Harlem, that's Spanish Harlem.
But it's like Manhattan North.
West side is predominantly Caucasian on that side.
From 155th Street to 188th Street, Dyckman and all that, you either lived there or you were up there to buy drugs. Nobody came to visit. There was nothing to see. There was nothing, positive about coming up there outside of doing something negative to be there.
I went to high school and I went to elementary school in the upper west and east side, so I was able to see kind of like a dichotomy.
I went to church on 155th Street in Amsterdam Avenue between Amsterdam and Broadway, and we used to have bilingual service. There was so many Dominicans up there. I actually learned a good chunk of my Spanish that I know now in life from living up there.
I probably came to the city, not even gonna lie, I probably came to the city on holidays like New Year's Eve, Easter, Christmas, stuff like that. But I really wasn't a city person. Like I said, I stayed in Brooklyn, so I mostly ran Brooklyn.
Some might say that, depending on where the streets are, you might live on a certain section of a borough.
Living in different boroughs, things are different.
Growing up in Manhattan, I had like the Harlem swagger about me. I always heard from the older guys that Brooklyn guys didn't like Harlem guys. So I went to high school in Brooklyn with this whole mind state of, yeah, I'm gonna hate it pretty much every day.
The slang, how people talk,
the way you dress,
how people approach different things, the living environments, the different cultures.
As a DJ, you pick up on stuff like that, you know what I mean? You pay attention, stuff like that. You realize when you're playing in different areas, the crowd that's generally from that area wants to hear different stuff.
How do you feel about raising a kid in Brooklyn?
I love it. Originally, I was from Brooklyn. I love being a dad from Queens with a son from Brooklyn.
Overall, Brooklyn is awesome. Like, I love Brooklyn. If I were to live in New York, You know, for a long time, it would be in Brooklyn.
Well, I grew up in Brooklyn, Brownsville.
I actually lived on this block here, Macon, between Troop and Marcus Garvey.
Cephalo Projects on 180 Powell Street.
So, you know, I think the stoops are kind of like a representation of what Brooklyn felt like to me at the time.
When I was growing up, I hardly ever went to Brooklyn.
Block parties, everybody knew each other. We used to hang out on the block with each other, sit on the stoops.
We was very tight-knit. Like, we was more like a family. We accepted outsiders, but, you know, it wasn't that too many outsiders.
It was a family. It was a family. Literally, it was to the point where if they were to put a gate at the end of each block on Troop and Marcus Garvey, you know, it wouldn't feel weird because it would be like a gated community.
And if you definitely wasn't a familiar face and nobody couldn't vouch for you, couldn't come over there.
Growing up, I would look at the other boroughs. I would look at the borough like Brooklyn and say, man, I got to be careful when I go to that hood, but I would still visit Fulton Mall all the time.
Brooklyn and the Bronx, definitely, if you weren't from there or you didn't have family, you just couldn't, like, you know, be happy-go-lucky walking around those places.
The gangs was real heavy in Brooklyn. It's either you was Blood or you was Crip. And from my area, it's mostly dominant Blood, so if you wasn't Blood, you couldn't come over there.
But Brooklyn was wonderful. I ended up meeting a whole, you know, group of people I didn't even know existed.
Brooklyn is the West Indian borough and the Jewish borough.
Like, if you ask me, Brooklyn have mostly islanders, like, you know, West Indies, Jamaican.
My family's descendants of Haiti. So you have Haitians, Jamaicans, Trinidadians, Bayesians, I mean everywhere. Just look at every Labor Day parade. That's the biggest parade in New York City history. Every year you have over about 1.52 million people that show up on Eastern Parkway and beyond.
Also doing a lot of cleaning up as far as in the community, you know, putting more after school programs into effect. Also, you know, remodeling, you know, apartments, remodeling just the projects as a whole.
However, Brooklyn, I love it, but it's become New Manhattan.
The community within itself is also being gentrified.
It's no longer the same anymore.
That's someone from Brooklyn. Are you a Nets fan?
No.
I went to Brooklyn Law School. I live in Brooklyn now. I built the life in Brooklyn. So, you know, all hate aside, I fuck with y'all Brooklyn cats. And I guess I'm gonna have to fuck with my son, so.
Queens is more of an R&B kind of vibe, honestly, to me. You know, hip hop, yes, but I feel like even as a DJ, you know, when you playing music in Queens, they want to hear that smooth, even if it's rap, it's still smooth compared to if we playing in Brooklyn and they want to hear that hardcore hip hop, you know what I'm saying?
Queens is far. I'm not even going to elaborate, it's just far.
Queens, everything's spread out.
Queens was the place to me where I thought people just had some houses.
Queens is becoming gentrified. If you go down Jamaica Avenue now, you see that they're building up high rises.
I believe it's the biggest borough space-wise.
I call Queens gumbo.
Queens, you just have a melting pot of cultures. I think
It's the most diverse place in America and probably even the world, and that's not even, you know, an opinion, that's a fact. You know, you have all different ethnicities.
You just get a little bit of everybody in Queens.
Everything, all kinds of food, all kinds of people.
Riding the train through Queens, you would just go through different neighborhoods, you know. You would see this type of ethnicity on the train, then another one, and another one.
The atmosphere is more better.
Queens has always been low key.
We used to think they were kind of soft.
They get their hands dirty, but you're not gonna see it, you're not gonna hear about it all the time.
Now I know they're not.
What did you say? Queens niggas are country wild boys, right? Some shit like that.
It was real out here, you know, definitely, and especially in Jamaica, Queens, where my chapter was based out of. It definitely, you know, Jamaica Avenue, the Coliseum block, we was definitely going to war with every gang, any and every gang.
You gonna talk about it, you know, I used to hustle up on Linden in the van. Me and my man did our thing hand to hand, you know what I'm saying? But you're not saying who your man is.
You know, there's a lot more things out there, bigger parks, definitely, you know, to raise your kids out there.
We have our, you know, wild sides or whatever, but, you know, for the most part, we were raised very well.
Queens is just dope, man.
I would definitely move to Queens.
I currently work in Queens now, so I get a Queens vibe daily.